Thank you so much. Success. The meeting is now live stream. Okay, so I will go back to screen sharing. Okay, again, for those who are watching this, the district, we had to ask the district for additional time twice, actually 3 times, but we didn't ask for the additional time the 3rd time. And we are now back. It is 11:43 in the morning, or early afternoon, whatever. And this is the PAT response to the PPS counter proposal. On the idea of stabilization of schools, which, by the way, just so you know, because so many of the schools historically have been CSI, TSI schools, we were viewing this, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes has the highest level of educators of color working in them, not, I'd say, exclusively. That's one reason why we incorporated this as part of our package. I realize it's sort of been taken out of that package, and I understand the confusion. It was meant to be part of that initial support portion. So, but that being said, here we are with this. What we did was we took a look at some of the things that you said, and I think this will be the first thing that we like the idea of voluntary separations of the school building. So we believe the district is accurately portraying what we had in mind, and we think that that's a really good idea. We had the idea, you had put 15% in a year, more than 15% in a year. And the only thing we're suggesting is, how to do that. We said 15% or more, just because it's, I think, more accurately addressing our original concept. What we suggest, this is all the original language that you suggested, that you accepted and we accepted. And then this is where we agree, by the way, if you see, it's hard to read. Maybe if I can make this a little larger. You'll see we agreed with striking the term high. We added the association and district shall review the reasons for the turnover and mutually agree upon strategies to address the problem. And the strategies shall include, but not be limited to, implementation of one or more of the following. And we had our ideas that were in there. We recognize, we heard loud and clear that, I guess, Sharon, I think you were the one who best described the district's concept of these may not be, different buildings have different reasons for the underlying flight, and we don't need to get into why all of those are. We know historically why some of those have been, but we know that in some of those buildings, from our information from the members, all of these would help a member feel better about staying. So we're suggesting maybe not all of them, which we originally suggested, but one or more of these and anything else that we agree to. So that's there. And the district and the association will review the attempts to reverse the turnover. And if those attempts were not successful, provide mutually agreed upon assistance to the educators in the school. So that means what our intention is, we didn't think that this was a one-shot fits all. It may be a one-year solution, depending on what the efforts were, and it may be something that we agree needs to go for another year or something else. And we would do that by meeting and talking with the members again and looking to see if this needed to continue to address the problem, that sort of thing. So this was our attempt to A, keep our original interests alive, and B, to meet the district with its suggestion that incorporating all of those solutions might not be necessary.
Okay, thanks, John. Questions on the district's team? I don't believe I have any, so I'm not hearing anybody from the district side jumping in.
I think I'd ask a quick question,
Sure.
Brian. It does presume, John, that one of those would be an appropriate remedy in every case. And I'm
Pretty much,
wondering,
yeah.
and I'm wondering if we can make that assumption without that causal analysis. I mean, is the association confident that in every situation, one of those is going to be responsive to a contributing factor?
Yes.
And
We,
I'm gonna ask a follow-up question.
I don't mean to be so so brief with my response. So let me just say yes. We know that in each one of these buildings, having additional planning time or professional development in some of these situations, and definitely a reduction in student load, would make work in these buildings, would reduce the. Let me put it this way: would reduce the desire to get out of the building. So we know that any one of those would be a help. We also know that there are, and we don't need to go into them, just because I want to be sensitive to the district. I mean, we know that some of these buildings, the reason for the flight has been something that might not be they may not be the source of the problem, but definitely would help address it. And we would want to include other things as well, if both sides agreed to them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right. That being said, we then have yep, here we go. Again, this is the same approach. We are trying to use the track change system that you've sent over. And as you'll see from the heading that we sent, we have retitled this and put a new header on it as well to try and indicate. With track changes, I'm always concerned that we lose the historical basis for, the history of the exchange proposals. So we're trying to be careful about that. If it didn't all come through accurately, I'm sorry, we can clean it up later. But here are the ideas that we had. We had a lot of time talking about these, and we appreciate the district's work that you spent on this. So, when we go through this, I want you to know that the vast majority of our time, which required, as I was jokingly saying, 3 extensions, was spent on these 3 items. But here's where we landed on this. The idea of the affinity groups. Our original intention of the affinity groups was to, and I'm not sure whether the district agrees with this or not, and we're not sure with the ideas that we got back from the district because they were in conversation. We're not sure if we grasped everything totally, but we had one issue that was we wanted to make sure that every building would have the ability to have these affinity spaces fully up and running based upon what the students needed. And we had attempted to do that by having, at least 4 or at least 2, depending upon the area or the grade levels. And that we tried to get that in. The other concept was we really wanted to make sure that the district recognized that the district needed to not rely upon Sun School to provide these. Not that Sun School efforts are a bad way to address different issues, but that the district needed to say, no, if we recognize a need that's taking place, we need to address that if we can, right? And there are going to be some situations where maybe you can't, but the district was going to identify funds to make sure that that was possible. It does, one of the things that we were talking about was although we appreciated the idea of compensation at an hourly rate, and as you'll see in here, we accepted that. But that we know that you're not going to say, well, the person's going to work in the Sun School program, but make their hourly rate from the PAT. that's not the way we had it going. So here's what we have with all of that in mind. And I don't know whether we're really close. We're trying to find a way that meets what the district was talking about, and also keeps, as I said in the last one, keeps our interests on this issue going as well. So that is, we accept the idea of compensation at the hourly rate. We wanted to make sure that we had in there an idea of what the hourly rate would cover, as I think there was a few comments on there. So we had educators will be compensated for all hours worked spent planning for, facilitating, and supporting the affinity group after submitting a monthly timesheet documenting the hours worked. So we wanted to make sure that, we didn't presuppose this is we're going to pay you for a half an hour for this a week, when in fact, in some cases, it may be a half an hour a week, and other ones, it may be much more than that. We do have the district shall dedicate funding for affinity groups in every building. The affinity group shall be determined by the student population within each school, and no affinity group shall be denied if the students petition the building administration for the creation of the group. Yeah, and that's where I'm trying to get to the idea that I spoke to earlier in the introductory comment to this, is that we were setting a number 4 in the high school and 2 in the elementaries and that sort of thing. And we got your idea loud and clear that there may be buildings that might have more need than 4, and certainly there may be buildings that, for whatever reason, may have less than 2 or 4. I'd be surprised, but what we said was, look, that makes sense, and it's, we originally put those numbers in as a way to sort of shape or to help the district in determining how much funding they should consider setting aside. But I think this gets to the heart of, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Kathleen, but the idea of, the district, the building should determine what's going on. And so that's our attempt to get to that. We both agreed that whenever possible, the affinity group provider should mirror the affinity population of students. And this wasn't spoken to in your counter proposal, so we don't know whether it was just sort of a Scrivener's error or if you really meant to delete it. But the idea that if there are people who are already doing this, the educators of color are actually already leading affinity groups, we thought that they should have priority when determining who's going to lead those groups. I know how sometimes if you select the whole thing for deletion, you sometimes grab more than you intended. If you intended more than that, we didn't mean to just brush past it. We just thought that since it wasn't addressed, that it might not have been intended. So that's where we are on number 1. And I suppose it would probably be best if you would like to, we can stop and address questions on this one before we move on.
And Kathleen can help fill in the gaps maybe a little bit too here for me. John, where does your group stand on the topic of the district's utilizing of community partners to do some of this work? You've heard, I think, Kathleen describe some of that, but I haven't been clear in hearing back from your group whether that's something, what that you're proposing these new affinity group stipends or advisors would sort of take the place of that, or whether your group is supportive of those community partnerships continuing. So it'd be good to hear how you envision those things kind of coexisting, if you don't mind.
If I can speak to some of that, and then John, you
please
can correct or supplement. I don't believe that we are opposed to community partnerships where they exist, and they should be encouraged and utilized to their fullest extent possible. But affinity groups should not have to rely on community partners for their existence. They shouldn't have to scrounge around for funding for their existence. They shouldn't have to put on a bake sale to exist, or the equivalent of find the change in your couch cushions in order to have your affinity group. And they shouldn't have to compete in the building's consolidated budget with other worthy things that every building has, but you can't fund every worthy thing. So we want affinity groups to have priority there and to ensure that they are in fact supported with resources wherever they come from.
Yeah,
That's fine, but as long as there are sufficient resources ensured.
And I can actually give a concrete example of when we did utilize our Sun partner for a group. We wanted to form a group for our Native American students. We didn't have anybody on staff who identified as Native American.
sure.
And so we were able to find a community leader through NAIA. However, what often happens for our BIPOC communities is that time is volunteered and that time is not paid or honored in compensation. And because as a district, we have very complex contracting procedures and certain minimums that have to be met and so on and so forth, our Sun partner was able to take on that responsibility for payment so that community partner could be paid. So otherwise we wouldn't have anybody. We had white educators who were willing to sponsor that group. But as I said, the best intentions don't necessarily meet the needs of the students. So that was kind of not a last resort, but we just simply did not have anybody on staff who could fill that role appropriately.
And that's exactly how we feel. Kathleen. Honestly, you hit the nail on the head. Where the idea that the affinity group provider should mirror the affinity population of students, we both agree to that. And yes, that would be a perfect example of that being met through the way. But we also know from when we brought this up under CDL, when we asked, a very quick thing, is anybody running these groups and is anybody doing it? If so, are you being compensated? And we had, and I mean this, virtually every building respond, yes, I'm running one of these, and no, I'm not being. So although we understand the idea of community groups and they are appropriate at times, we also know there is a massive need among the students to have these up and running. And we know that teachers are wanting to help kids and are literally doing it during their own lunchtime. That's a terrible way to go about doing this. So that's the reason why we're making this, as we said, in the morning session, as intentional as possible when we go through this. But to your answer, Brian, we're not taking a position that we do not want community groups assisting students. Of course not.
Okay, thanks. That helped. And I think, Kathleen, your example really helps because that sounds like a case where you technically could have gotten somebody on staff to serve in that leadership role. They would not have mirrored the affinity group, the students in the affinity group very well. So the community partner was able to step in and do that a little bit more effectively, it sounds like. Sorry, I see, Robbie, that your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just curious, how are we defining affinity groups? Are we thinking like QSA and racial affinity groups, or is it just student interest groups?
Well, we don't intend this we don't intend an affinity group to be, the science club, if that's what you mean. I'm not sure precisely how you intended the question, but I mean, no, we are thinking about this to assist students who feel either the need for space with their peers who identify the same way. That's who we're intending to serve.
Okay.
I mean, Robbie, did I get that? I mean, am I missing the point of your question? I don't mean to gloss over it. Okay.
No, I was just curious because I know that some schools have like a QSA, some have like a BSU, and then there are like an anime or a karaoke club. So I just I'm just curious about.
Yeah, I hear. Okay.
What it looks like. Yeah.
No.
Robbie, can you think of, or anybody else, can you think of any that like kind of fall in a gray area where we may have a question? I mean, I like John, your example of science club, I think that one's a pretty clear-cut one. And the non-affinity groups, not that there's anything that's not great about a science club.
No, exactly. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if there are any that people can think of where we would be in a spot of saying, is this an affinity group or is this a student interest club? Just curious, or maybe that's not the case.
I think the way you just said it makes sense. Like a student interest club is different than
Yeah.
a group that is about how we identify and how we support and how we connect and how we build a relationship and trust. Like that's So
Okay. Thanks, Charity.
I do have wonderings, and I don't know exactly how this plays in, but I do have wonderings about just that I understand Kathleen's example and the importance of it. And I don't think that displaces the need for relationships to be built in building with people that are in building every day. So I wonder about like, how do we, I don't know, how do we co-facilitate, or how do we bring in like a, I don't know, an ally, and maybe it's not appropriate that they're in the affinity space, but how are we bridging that back to people who are in the building every day? Or is there a need for that? Or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, Kathleen, do you have thoughts on that? I mean, you've talked about your experience with your Native American student group there, and Charity, just to kind of paraphrase, it sounds like what you're saying is, well, if a community partner is doing the affinity groups, then there still isn't a touch point on school staff or somebody who is kind of the go-to person that's there all the time, or that's on school staff. So I don't know, Kathleen, what your experience was, how that played out.
Yeah, well, what I can say are a couple of things. First of all, our community partner made an effort to come during lunchtime and touch base with the students, as well as work with teachers, also to see if there were additional supports that could happen. But I would say, as far as making sure that every student in the building has somebody they feel comfortable approaching and trusting, there are a number of ways to approach that. In middle school, it was through advisory, having small advisories by having every adult have a smaller group as opposed to a whole class size. It's also teachers making contacts, counselors, touching base with students. And as part of our SIP team process, if we had a student who was identified as tier 2 or tier 3 in some area, we always made sure that there was an intentional adult that they already had an affinity with or a relationship with, that they felt comfortable approaching, as we worked with the student, the family, and the staff. Because I feel that's just part of basic functioning as an educator, is that we have to go out of our way. We shouldn't need an affinity club for that, or an affinity group. We should all be going out of our ways to form relationships with students and make sure that every student has that somebody that they feel comfortable with. And it might not be an educator. It might be somebody, our custodians, it might be a secretary. It might be, we're all educators. The way our strategic visioning is going, everyone who works with our district is an educator. And so it's finding that person with whom the student can connect.
And my question, I'm hoping there wouldn't be a situation where, if there was an educator in the building that was that mirrored the population of the affinity group and was willing to serve in that role, that it wouldn't go to a community partner instead.
I think it's best practice. It would be best to be somebody in the building. It would be fabulous, because then you also have that additional role model in multiple ways, being manifested for students. So that obviously should take priority. For me, as a principal, it was a last resort to go to a community partner, because I didn't have anybody who could fill that role.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. That's how we thought you meant it. And it's good. Yeah, thank you for the clarity.
I don't have any additional questions on this one, unless others on the district team do.
Okay, then, hearing none, and I'll certainly go back if anything else comes up, obviously. But the second one that we have, professional education, the DLI stipend for, well, it's not a DLI stipend, it's the bilingualism stipend. There was a lot of editing in it that the district did, and we understood from the conversation the source of the editing. And then when we tried to explain what it was that we were going for, the comment was that okay, that gives us things to think about. And when we as a team spent a lot of time asking ourselves, well, okay, look at these edits that they've done. is that meeting in essence what we were talking about, and does it get to the heart of the purpose of what we proposed? And I think that we need to we have resubmitted our initial proposal, and we've done so, not as a stick in the eye to the district, but as now that the full discussion has been taking place over why we proposed it and what our intention was. Both sides, I think, need to take another crack at edits and everything else that are taking place. I mean, clearly, we were intending this. We do not believe that, of course, the DLI program are individuals who are bilingual, but we also know that there are all sorts of educators. Well, first of all, not every educator in a DLI program, like not every educator at Scott, for example, is by definition bilingual. We don't mean that. And we also, there are, as we said earlier this morning, counselors, social workers, then the list of staff who have been hired and brought into a building because of their bilingual skill is vast and wide. And those are the individuals that we're talking about, since that is they're leaned on very heavily in those buildings because of that skill beyond their monolingual colleagues. So that's why we're proposing this. I think that's the easiest way to summarize why we have. It really wasn't a DLI sole issue that we were putting forward, and we didn't want it to mean that it was for, it's really for bilingualism. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I do understand the distinction there. I mean, I think DLI has some other components aside from just the bilingualism aspect that we've been working on, in both that some of the MOUs and then in this discussion that go also to workload. So, but I hear what you're saying, that you're looking to recognize that bilingualism beyond just that bilingual or the DLI program. So we started to have a little bit more conversation on this one as a group. Didn't get that far into that conversation. So I think it's a continuing topic for us.
Yeah, and this wasn't meant as a take it or leave it response. It was that after we went around and around, as I've tried to indicate about the counter proposal, and we kind of thought that maybe we were circling the concept, but that in the counter proposal we hadn't really gotten to what we were aiming at, which is, so that's why we've done this. And just to give us the capacity to continue discussing it. I mean, that's really the purpose of this as it is. And I have to say, you already have this, so it's not like I'm hiding it from you with the screen this way. The third one is the same thing. The contract currently says that the district shall make every effort to provide material, in the language of instruction. But that language is now, I might be wrong, 5 years old, 4 years old. And clearly, I'm not going to say that the district hasn't tried in some cases, but, the adoption of curriculum that didn't have, dual language capacity and dual language support, that wasn't simply happening, which is why we've made it that the district shall provide. We know that the district is now making a really big push to accomplish this, and it's gone a long way, and that's what we're putting this in for. So I just we're resubmitting this because it's not that the language in the contract, it doesn't have elements of it that address it. It's just addresses it in a way that hasn't been utilized in any sort of meaningful approach in our eyes. So this one is significant, I guess.
John, are you thinking that this would replace that current contract language? I'm not. It's not coming to mind what specific provision it is, but you know the contract better than I do.
No, so that you can get where we're coming from, there is the 8.12, which is the curriculum materials in the language of instruction. It's in Article 8, the workload provision, and we had a statement in there which we bargained. I don't know, 2018, maybe 2017, possibly. The district shall make every effort to provide professional educators working in dual language immersion programs, equivalent district adopted materials. And what we were talking about, and the conversations were, that went on for a long time, and we broke out examples. Like, look, here's the math curriculum, and it comes with posters and manipulatives and all sorts of other things, overhead or computer slides and everything else in English, and zero other language component that matches it. I mean, literally zero. And the district was adopting those things. And so we put this in here we wrote that language, and both sides agreed to it at the time. But the district shall make every effort. That's hard for the district to comply with, and it's hard for us to comply with. It's hard for us to get a sense of whether or not it's being done. We in fact know that there have been adoptions since then that didn't have those things, which makes it hard to think that every effort was made. And we don't think it's because, and I mean this, we don't think that's because of some sort of ill intent. It's just, the biggest district in Oregon with lots of different topics taking place, and it somehow got passed. This makes it clear that no, it's going to have to happen. There will have to be materials that match the language of instruction. It's going to take place. And it will, this is meant to replace that portion. The other elements of it, we don't intend to replace.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I'll go back and take a look at that language. I'm not as familiar with it.
Sure, understood.
Question or feedback or anything from district folks on this one? I don't have anything in particular. Okay, hearing none. John, what's your thinking, or anybody, as to what we want to do at this point? We want to take a lunch break at some point. Did you guys have other items that you wanted to turn to now? What's your thinking?
We do have other elements to present, but we just need to edit after we worked as fast as we could in the group to make sure that we were all comfortable. Sharon, you and I were talking about it. Bargaining Wednesday and bargaining Friday, with other bargains taking place in between. We wanted to make sure that everybody on the team had a chance to review it, and there have been some suggested edits before we present it to you. And so with that in mind, we're really close to being able to present those, but don't have them done yet. So okay, it's just like literally like a sentence has to be changed here and there, but it's just not in a presentable form because of that. Okay. So that being said, maybe it would be time for a lunch break. Okay. That sounds good to the district team. I can't see everybody, but so I don't know if you're saying yes or no or what have you.
Yes.
All right. What do we think time-wise? Is 1 o'clock sufficient time to take lunch break and then also make whatever small changes you guys need to make and then be back? Does that work for you? I think. My team, that's not for me to say. All of you know what you have. Do you think we can get this, make these changes and be ready by 1? Yes. I can see Steve saying yes. Okay, 1 o'clock it is. Okay, great. Thank you. You got it. Thank you.